Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Finances, Keeping Your Camp in the Black. My name's Sandor. I am your host for the session for the next hour and 15 minutes. We've got a great panel for you. We're going to go through a variety of topics, then information that we'd like to impart to you. And then we're going to leave time at the end for your questions. And we want to weave those in and make sure that we are serving your needs. So as with all Burning Man Zooms, we have a couple of guidelines that we ask you to remember. Please mute your mic if you're not a panelist. If you have a question, please type that into chat. We've got D-Rex, who's working the chat to help us collect those questions. If you have a comment or question, we sure want to hear it, but we're going to try and keep things organized. Please be respectful. Please be present. Please speak from your own experience. And as I said, Daisy will bring your, D-Rex will bring your messages in. Well, I'm going to stop sharing these slides and you're going to see our panel now spotlit in the center here. And I want to go through and give each of these folks an opportunity to introduce themselves. I'll introduce myself first and then kick it over to you next, Pablo. So I'm Sandor. I am a volunteer with Camp Support. I do a variety of things with Burner 501c3s. I run the Hoopla theme camp. We serve breakfast tacos on the playa, usually on the 9 o'clock side. I hope you come by for the breakfast tacos. I have a mutant vehicle and a volunteer for the DMV. So that's me in a nutshell. Financially, I do all the finances for my camp and a bunch of Burner stuff. And I have just a career on Wall Street and a lot of finance experience. So that's me, Pablo. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, my name's Pablo. We have a camp called Disco Balls. It's a mutant vehicle camp. So we have 2 mutant vehicles. We have a very small camp compared to the other guys here. And we have about 12 to 15 people usually in our camp. And mostly our camp is financed by me. So I think I might be a lot like some of the smaller people out there. So perhaps, looking forward to what's going to happen next.
All right. Thank you, Pablo. Let's kick it over to you, Ray.
Sure. Hey, Ray Perfectti. Okay, you can hear me. Ray Perfectti. I am with Costume Cult out of New York City. Currently visiting San Francisco today, but normally in New York. Our camp is typically around 7 o'clock in Esplanade. We are about anywhere from 150. We've been as high as 250 campers. So on the somewhat larger side, I am co-leading our camp this year.
Thank you, Ray. And then Jurrient, tell us a little bit about you.
I'm Jurrient. I'm one of 4 co-leads at Feed the Artists, usually found at 10 o'clock, somewhere between D and G or so. So I'm in charge of the finances. We usually have around 75 campers, and our mission is to feed the artists during build week as they are setting up their art installations, and then feeding the burner community during burn week through our late night food court.
Thank you very much. And, again, working chat for us is D-Rex. I'll do a quick introduction for D-Rex. D-Rex is my co-lead for Hoopla and my wife. So she'll definitely keep me in line. The rest of you, maybe if you haven't already, sound off in chat. Tell us who you are. We want to know who you are. And if you would like, change your name to reflect your camp or your town that you're from. So we have a sense of who you are. I guess we have about 30 people in the room right now. We're so happy you're here. And let's get into it. So at a high level, and to give a little structure to our conversation, we're going to talk about keeping your camp in the black, basically break even or better, in a couple of different buckets. The first bucket we're going to talk about is revenue. Then we're going to talk about expenses. Then we're going to talk about dealing with contingencies and unforeseen circumstances. And then we're going to obviously have Q&A at the end. Excuse me. So on a revenue side, and that's where we'll start, I'm going to go and toss a question out to the panel. Tell us, give us an overview of how you guys approach collecting money for Burning Man. Not year round just yet. We'll talk about that in a second, but just for Burning Man. Jurrient, let's start with you.
Yeah, so for us, the process is both simple and extremely complicated because we open our enrollment in early January when we have no idea about, steward sale tickets or vendor costs. But, we run a fully equipped commercial kitchen, and we need everything from water to, diesel to propane and everything else. But we've been around for about 15 years or so. Our sole source of revenue is just through our camp dues. Like I said, we have about 75 members. Members will donate their services and stuff as well, and so it's really just from the people who are in our community, and I would say people who have been at Feed the Artists, it's probably a couple of hundred, 300, 400 maybe, but in each given year we have about 75. So pretty much everything comes from just setting dues and collecting dues, and people donating in kind. So one person might donate chef's coats for our chefs. So things of that nature.
Thank you, Pablo. You're sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yep. Our camp we started in 2017, and we have about 12 to 15 campers. This year we have 12 right now with tickets, so, and about 6 people who want tickets. So we're a small camp. I started this just because of my love of building stuff and doing stuff and giving to the community, and I fell in love with Burning Man and just wanted to just do more and more. So a lot of the stuff that happens in our camp has been self-financed by me. I've done the tents and the cover. We do a disco night where we play all the old disco tunes and set up the whole sound system and everything. So I'm getting help from our campers. I mean, and they're helping, and when there's things that need to be bought, we've been just maybe the close 3 or 4 of us have kind of pitched in a little bit of money, but pretty much I financed the whole thing. So as far as the revenue, it's mostly come from me. So that's how, and I love it no matter what. Luckily, I'm in a position to do this.
Thank you, Pablo. Ray, what about you guys over at Costume Cult?
Yeah, so we have a mix of how we make revenue. Certainly through camp dues. Our camp dues are about $500 for a normal camper, about $2,000 for per RV that might go in our camp. Generally speaking, those dues are covering quite a lot. They're covering dinner every burn day. They're considering breakfast items each day. They're doing meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner during build week. We're giving power to our campers in our tents. We're doing portos in our camp, water buffalo, evap pond, gray water, shower stall, center shade, like all of it. And then of course, obviously our costume experience, there is not insignificant costs associated there, which I know we're going to talk expenses later, but with costume acquisition, more than 10,000 costumes a year. But that's what the camp dues cover a lot of, but we also supplement a lot of our costs with fundraising, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later. And that is a very significant backstop to making sure that we can offer so much at that particular camp due rate.
Thank you for that. And I'll go through Hoopla. Hoopla, again, we're primarily a food camp. We're out of Houston. We're all sort of centrally located in one place mostly. And so we have a couple of different sources of revenue to the camp associated with just going to Burning Man. So dues, certainly like you're hearing other folks charge. We have a deposit that we tie to behavior. So we want people to stay for teardown. We want people to fill their shifts. And then we give people an opportunity to donate that deposit if they so choose, and most of our people end up giving that back to the camp. And then finally, we run a community truck from Houston, and we charge for that. And it's sort of all you can eat. Whatever you want to put on that truck, there's a cost. If you don't want to put anything on that truck, that's fine. If you want to, that's fine. It also takes the camp gear, and it typically gets pretty close to break even. Sometimes it produces a little bit more money that we then use to help offset camp expenses. But probably the most important thing that it does is it takes away some of the costs associated with moving our gear as a camp. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. And that's the first takeaway that we wanted to put out there for everybody about the revenue side of this. One, it is okay to charge dues. And it is okay to charge a lot of dues if that's what you need to cover what you're offering. Now, we're not suggesting that you charge a lot of dues that are well above and beyond what you're providing people. Burning Man's not intended to be a fundraiser for your life, but don't be bashful. Meet people all the time that don't charge any dues and they just eat it. If you're able to do that, that's awesome. But I meet a lot of people for whom that's a burden. And don't feel like there aren't people doing that are charging dues. There's a lot of people that have dues that are on the higher end of the scale. I think I heard, they're not official numbers, but I heard at one point $300 is the average dues for Burning Man camp. We should probably update that. That's a few years old. But if you wonder, gosh, should I be asking for money from folks? There's certainly precedent out there, and a lot of people are doing it. The next kind of takeaway that I wanted to hit with folks is that, and I want to kind of come to you, Pablo. We have someone that is funding most of the camp out of their back pocket. Do people abuse that? Or how does that make you feel? How should we treat people who are kind enough to do that?
I think that I've had issues where, I have campers that come and say they're going to stay, to take down and stuff. And 6 a.m. on Sunday, they're gone, by the time I wake up. So, that's frustrating to have people that abuse it. But at the same time, I think we've been, always able to get everything done. So I'm not, as long as it gets done, I'm not all that worried about it. And my attitude just on life isn't to get frustrated for things. So it's just not my nature. But I could definitely see where people who, I would say maybe more normal people would get really frustrated with a lot of the stuff that I've gone through. But does that answer the question pretty good?
It does. And that sort of ties in with what we do with Hoopla with a deposit that's tied to behavior. So incentivizing people to come through in a way that, everyone's kind of pulls an oar. Ray, let's come to you for a minute. Can you talk a little bit about some of the year-round things that Costume Cult does above and beyond just money coming into the camp from Burning Man associated activities? But you guys have an amazing schedule. Tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. We definitely consider ourselves a year-round organization. We throw a number of 3 large parties every year: Hornball, Black and Light Ball, and Freak Show, as well as a variety of other smaller events that aren't necessarily revenue generating, but they kind of keep our membership active and engaged. To give you some sense of the kind of impact that has financially, we just held our Hornball party this last Saturday in Brooklyn. We had about 600 attendees, about 40 to 50 volunteers actually making the party happen. We netted, we did it in a venue, the Bell House. We netted about $30,000, and about $5,000 of that went to expenses. So that amounts to, so that $25,000 in profit amounts to about $170 off of what we would need to otherwise charge campers. And again, we had 3 of them, with Freak Show being historically smaller, except for last year, which was quite large at like 1,500 people. I understand that that's probably like much larger than most folks would do here, but I want to sort of emphasize that the principle applies regardless of what size you are. So, I would sort of say you can really start small, because we started very small with this, and it doesn't have to be like a huge party like that to make a big substantial difference. Remember that profit is divided up over 150 to 100, 200 campers, as opposed to, what might be divided under a much smaller number of campers for you guys. So, some other things that go on, for example, that we don't make revenue off of, but we could, or you could. For example, tomorrow there is an LED wearables workshop that someone is running with about 15 people. He's running it twice. There's Apply a Bike Ride happening tonight through another group, not ours. They started with like 24 people riding, putting LEDs on their bikes and riding around New York City. And now I think that they have 2,000 people. We've done costume crawls. We've done, you can do a museum day with a subject matter expert that might be in your camp. And all of these things are things that you can really just ask for a small donation. and perhaps even give something tangible like drinks or stuff or anything, so that way muggles who go who think transactionally can feel like they also, got something more than just the experience. Although I think we appreciate just the experience. I would sort of also advise that, I thought about this and said, for the group here, what are ways that you could start fundraising for your camp? What are some really actionable things that would make that possible? I would say, number one, choose an idea that your campers are passionate about. Make the campers want to fundraise, make them feel connected. We as burners have a vast array of tools in our kit. Think creatively about what you have. And let them tell, like, it doesn't all rest on you. Your campers can do this without you having to run it personally as the lead. And that's really a lot better, because that sort of like leads me into really making your events about community building. Fundraising is a byproduct. That's why we have so many more events than we actually make money off of. Give opportunities for your campers to participate. It's going to improve your camp cohesion. You're going to have succession planning and finding leaders. And you are going to be able to enjoy it as well as not necessarily having to organize it. It shouldn't feel like work. Support and collaborate. Consider supporting and collaborating with other camps. We do that a lot, where you get economies of scale. It changes the diversity in what you bring, and your audience doesn't just grow to just the 2 camps. It usually grows much, much larger, which is what we found. Being able to throw that's how, when people say, how do you throw 1,500 person parties? It's because we have built up networks doing things with other camps, and they get to know our name. They get to recognize a costume call party is going to be a lot of fun, and that really drives things. So that was 2. 3, I would say choose an idea with a low barrier to entry, meaning that you have to make space for people that are curious, especially non-burners. So for example, everybody loves to, like for us, for costume people, everybody loves to dress up for Halloween. Everybody can put on a costume. That's easy, right? You can say something like the Playa bike ride, that started with 24 people just riding around New York City. A lot of people have bike and how to ride a bike. Very low barrier to entry for anybody, burner or non-burner. Muggles are really fascinated by what we do, and you can create programming around that and make modest amounts of money that grows and grows and grows. And then the last tip I would say is lean into success with recurrence and spinoffs. So for us, we have the same 3 parties every year, same time, same overall theme: hornball, freak show, black and light ball. They happen in the same month. People know to expect them. So what has happened? They have become community events, something people can look forward to every year. So again, it's leaning into success, make it about community building, make it low barrier to entry, and choose something your campers are going to be passionate about and they're going to want to put their time in. And then my bonus tip would be, don't forget swag. We make like not a huge amount of money, but just, stickers or t-shirts or stuff like that. People need stuff to give out at the burn, and you can make little bits of money on it. And that doesn't help a ton, but it helps a little bit.
Well, and, we do similar things in our camp. We have a little mini regional burn. We have parties and fundraisers and things where we're asking for $5 here or there, and it adds up over time. And one thing that I think it's important to highlight that you talked about, life is so much easier on the financial side when you pick a geographic home and you can build ties into your community where you are, and you can build a network of people that are where you are. It's so much easier to throw a party and to have volunteers for that party and to have something that you can advertise and network with if you've got 20, 30 people in one place. Now that's not to say you can't throw a great party if you have all your campers scattered all over the world, and people do that and they figure out how to make their finances work. But something I always urge people to think about in these forums is, man, is there a way to pick a home and to look year round at what that home might offer you and what you might offer that home as a camp? Something that can really sort of turbocharge your ability to get stuff done. Jurrient, I want to come to you. When we did our sort of pre-call, you talked about your camp starting to think ahead to folks that maybe the dues or the expenses of Burning Man are starting to get away from them. And maybe tell us a little bit more about that, and knowing that you guys are maybe not done with that process, but you're thinking through it now. Help us a little bit as we start to do the same thing. How did you guys get started with that conversation, and how are you guys trying to move that forward?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And for our camp, where we are a capital intensive camp, right? We have kitchen gear, so we yeah. So unfortunately, we can't go around and like Ray, like have fundraisers, because we would need our kitchen to succeed on our mission unless we can borrow another kitchen, and we're also spread all over the place. But for us, the biggest thing is we have to back out of our expenses and raise revenues that way, right? So because we have a full kitchen and we feed artists every night during build week and burners every night during burn week, we need to have the water, we need to have the diesel, we need to have a generator, we need to have a refrigerated container, which we do, a reefer, and we need the water tanks, the gray water tanks, the pump outs. So we need all of those pieces in the chain. And if one of them breaks, we're screwed, right? Like if we run out of diesel, the food in our reefer goes bad, and then we can't fulfill our mission of feeding our community. So that's kind of how we start. And as we all know, like the cost from the vendors, those come in after we've set dues and opened up camp to enrollment, and so it's a very live balancing act in terms of how many campers should you have, what do you charge, what kind of resources do you provide. We also have a shower trailer, but that's a major luxury that maybe someday we won't be able to do because it eats up a fair chunk of our budget. And then there's always these unforeseen expenses, right? I mean, it's one thing on day 3 of build week, you kind of have a sense of where everything is, but like day 4 of burn week, if you're running out of diesel and you're flagging down, someone to give fuel, or you have to get extra propane at Hell Station, or more water from United Site Services or Custom Waterworks or what have you, all people are just running their credit cards or paying cash in camp, like myself and my fellow TCOs, and then only after the burn do you get a sense of like, oh my God, we ran like $10,000 over budget because of the unforeseen circumstance. I mean, if you're in the middle of it and you run out of water or you need to get pumped out, there's like nothing you can do other than just get that done and then figure out the fallout later. And so ideally, to your question, we can anticipate that and build a rainy day fund into the budget, and that's something we're trying to do. But it's a moving target, because we're also trying to build into the budget a scholarship fund, right? So that the folks who pay, we tend to have higher dues just because of what I just mentioned. We have all of this stuff that we need to do, and that's our mission, is to gift food. So this year we're charging $1,500, which is a lot of money, and not everyone can pay that. So we also build a scholarship fund so that the folks who need some help, that we can give it to them, whether it's a full scholarship, for the lack of a better word, or a partial one. So we're trying to get from sort of behind the 8 ball of trying to figure out how to make ends meet as we get through the burn and as the bills come due after the burn, to actually being more proactive, and whether it's 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever the number is, that we have that kind of built in to the budget. But it's hard because we only have 75 people. We have to charge a lot of dues, and it's not always the same 75, right? So people who are paying into that this year may not be there next year, and that doesn't mean they're not willing to pay. But it's it's not a simple proposition.
Well, those are really important points, and it gets so tricky with money when you start talking about Burning Man and the desire to be radically inclusive. And you don't want money to be a barrier for people to participate, but you need money to do what you want to do. and ideally spread around a bit so it's not one person that's just left holding the bag. And so I love the things that you're describing, Jurrient. I'll tell you, in our camp as well, we spend a lot of time thinking about different ways to contribute beyond money. And we have people who are kind enough to donate for other people so that they can attend. And then the people that get those, we say to them, hey, look, we have someone that's going to take care of you for the burn, but would you consider donating some time or some sweat equity, or you're a really amazing artist. Do you mind painting these things for us? People love to contribute, and the people that maybe aren't in a financial position to contribute, I think it does them a disservice if you just sort of limit them to money when they have so much more to offer. And so we're kind of coming to the end of our revenue section, but I wanted to sort of re-hit some of our takeaways. The first, again, is don't be bashful about charging dues. Everybody does it. You're basically just sharing costs. And if it's something that you need to do, and I meet people all the time through all of the camp support stuff that are just, they love Burning Man, but they feel so put upon. Please don't take that on yourself. Lean on your camp, lean on other people, and charge dues if you need to. Diversify what you're sort of bringing money into your camp. So on Playa, there's other things you can offer, like a truck. Maybe there's other things that you're thinking about where you can tie things that people want to what they're paying for, like we do with the community truck, where you're still cost sharing, but you're providing some additional value to them. And most people are generally okay with you tucking some camp stuff in there with that gear along the way. Think of your camp as a year-round effort if you can, and look for ways to fundraise when you have a group you're trying to keep together and build community with. Parties are a great way to do that. We talked about bike rides. There's all manner of, you're only limited by your creativity to think of fun burnery things that people might want to do. And asking for $5 here or there can really add up. You do a burn, or you do a weekend, or you just something similar to that. It's not unheard of for folks to be charging $75, $100 a head for that sort of thing for 3-4 days. And those numbers can add up very quickly. And they allow you to ideally take care of other people, sort of like Jurrient was talking about at the end. And you're able to spread the love and, having money for folks that don't have money, but still allow them to contribute. Think of ways that they can contribute. Anything else, guys, that I didn't hit on revenue before we move on to expenses?
I think you convinced me to start charging dues.
Mission accomplished. So I have a really good friend who's the TCO of another camp. He loses $25,000 regularly every Burning Man. I make him come to this panel. I'm mad because he's not here. I'm always trying to convince him not to lose money, but he won't listen to me. All right, so that's revenue. Let's talk about expenses. How do you budget? Jurrient, let's start with you. How do you guys budget? How do you think about expenses? How do you think about what stuff's going to cost? How do you just sort of figure that out?
Yeah, so we start with last year's numbers, right? We do a complete forensic cleanup, in October or whenever it is, when all the bills have been collected and paid, and we know like who advanced this amount on the credit card for fuel or whatever it is. And so as the CFO person, for the lack of a better word, I reconcile all that, and I put a spreadsheet together. I look at all the dues, and in some years, all of a sudden it's like, well, this person didn't even pay their dues. So collecting dues is part of that as well. And then I just use that as a template, and you can do some scenario building if you're financially inclined. So for this year, I assumed a fairly hefty inflation rate, because we know in the economy that inflation is a major problem. We haven't been to the playa, or at least in an organized burn, for a couple of years. So I made some assumptions about, basically everything is up 25%. Let's assume that. And that actually proved to be very conservative. And then you back out of those numbers and you say, okay, at 75 campers, what does every camper need to pay? Allowing for that, the campers who can pay are probably going to pay a little bit more to to help out the campers who can't. Think of it as a school tuition system, right? So if 50% can pay the whole thing, maybe they pay $100 more than they really that they're getting, services for. Not that everyone is paying for services. Obviously, we don't do that, but in order to help out the folks that need help, and so that goes into the model. And then you just start to play with the numbers, right? I mean, we in our placement questionnaire, we have 75 to 99. We're in that category of number of campers. And then I think being creative and flexible is important. So if we're aiming for 75 and those 75 are paying 1,500, that's a budget of 100,000. And, hopefully that's going to be sufficient to run our kitchen for those 2 weeks, because we're there for 2 weeks, right? Build week plus burn week. And if it turns out that the cost inflation is more than we thought, that water is going to cost more per gallon than we had thought, or diesel, like we don't even know what the propane and the diesel are going to cost. Like a lot of the vendors don't even have their permits yet, in terms of renting generators and things like that. So a lot of this is not completely unknown, but a lot of this is known after you've set dues. And so at that point, I think some flexibility about enrollment is important. So we have a limited space. We usually apply for 100 by 300 feet. But if someone wants to bring a plus one or another person, and that person is going to cohabitate that yurt or RV, then that's a different math than someone wanting to come in who brings their own RV and then take up a larger footprint, right? So you kind of have to put that all in an Excel spreadsheet and say, okay, maybe we have to go to 80 instead of 75, as long as those extra 5 people don't consume too many resources, right? They're all going to consume water and food, and of course, but that's kind of how we think about it. But it's, we know, I mean, the expenses are somewhat fixed. Like, we cannot do our mission without having a kitchen and power and water and all that stuff. And then it's just a matter of backing into the number. And if the number is too high, then we either have to cut things that we provide to our campers, like a shower, or try to have one of our campers build, their own shower structure, like a MASH type shower, rather than renting the trailer. And then playing with the numbers. And maybe some years you got to go up a little bit, other times you go down. But it's like a 3-dimensional chess game. So there's a lot of different variables.
One thing that you said that I really want to highlight for everybody is, and you got to keep your receipts. Even if it's just, this is a little thing from Walmart, right? It's got little tabs. Just tuck all your receipts in it. And if you don't keep your receipts, you have no idea how much you're spending on your camp. I meet people all the time that are just, it's all cash, or, they never keep any receipts. They're trying, a month after the burn, they're trying to think through all the stuff they spent money on. I mean, you have hundreds and hundreds of charges and expenses for a decent sized camp.
And Sandor, I'll just add one thing that you just raised. Having centralized payments and revenues and expenses, like we tend to use PayPal, and we use friends and family, so we're not considered a business, obviously, because we're not. But reconciling all the pluses and minuses, the fewer platforms you have, the easier it gets. So we try to do everything on PayPal. Not every vendor can be paid on PayPal; then you have to use a credit card. But that because if we get the dues in, and they come in chunks, right? There's a deposit first and then the final, and then we have a lot of international campers. So we have people from Brazil who then, like, maybe that person doesn't have access to PayPal, and then someone else is paying for them and getting settled up, but then I don't know who that person is when I see the incoming. So it can be kind of a hard task. So the more you simplify where the money comes from and where it goes, the easier.
This is a great point. But, if you're, say, a new camp and you don't have last year to look at, you've got a bunch of people on right now that could tell you what they spent in their camps. Camp support at burningman.org. We can hook you up with a camp if you're trying to figure out your expenses. If you're a new camp, we'll help you get there. So keep good records first and foremost, and use that to predict the following year. Pablo, you are building an art car or rebuilding an art car. And so you're having to bring in a lot of expensive materials. How do you do that cheaply? How do you cut those expenses?
I mean, I definitely watch all the auctions local in Southern California. And I buy stuff super cheap there. I go to the metal supply and look at the bent metal pieces that are in the rack, for the seconds and try to buy stuff there. Try to, ask all my friends, do you have any resources to any of these things? A lot of the stuff that I try to do is, try to bring it in cheaply. I was, as you said, keeping records of your expenses and stuff. I'm almost afraid to do that because if my wife saw it, I'd be in probably big trouble. So, so I haven't really been keeping track year to year, what I've been spending because it's mostly been paid by me. But I think I definitely should do this for the future and start looking at it. Obviously, one of the things that I did this year was I applied for a grant with Burning Man and for my to rebuild my art car and was able to get a grant this year. So that was is going to be super helpful.
Well, that is near and dear to my heart. So I have to mention that. So Burner Network is a 501c3 we talked about in the plenary. It's separate from Burning Man, but it's a lot of Burning Man volunteers. And Pablo was one of our grant recipients. And so if you look, and this backs up to revenue for a second, if you look around in your community, there are grant programs as well. There's all kinds of people giving out money. Sometimes just if you connect with your city councilman or woman and you ask, hey, what's out there? Their office will point you in the direction of some really cool stuff. But anyway, I love what you're saying. I love the idea of sourcing from multiple sources. I always, anytime I buy anything from my camp, I use the rule of 3. I have to get 3 estimates. I can't get 1 estimate. I can't get 2. I have to have 3 when we can't just source it for free. So thank you for that, Pablo. Ray, let's come back to you. So you're doing all these great fundraisers. You have all these people running around. They are spending money for your events, and then I assume wanting to get reimbursed. How do you keep track of that? How do you make sure that they're not being wasteful or that they are doing a good job with the group's money?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so tactically, we are collecting a lot of information in spreadsheets. We're getting folks to submit receipts. We're issuing generally Venmo payments based on that. And that's how we're sort of dispersing it. But I think that on a principle level, we are doing something similar things about trying to be scrappy and resourceful. Anywhere we can to save money. So, for example, we have access to a group called Materials for the Arts in New York, which supports 501c3s or nonprofits, basically, in getting access to materials that other commercial groups may donate. So we get lots of fabrics, and we actually started something at the last regional we went to, Love Burn. We got jewelry that somebody had donated, and we made KK Jewelers. And we literally go in there and we say, what do you have? And then we make our designs based on what we have and what we can get, and not the other way around. We very much are looking for anything that we can do, but I think a lot of it all really ladders up to just building strategic relationships. Relationships with your campers, relationships with local burners, local businesses, other arts collectives, just any other people who care about what you care about. So, for example, we have heavily used a maker space by another burner. And able to sort of exchange, just, apart from the fact that we obviously follow each other's mission, we helped with things that she had brought to Love Burn. And we also, are able to sort of host our build days for some of our crew out in her maker space and get probably a lot more access. And we're looking into paying some subscription fee to that, but not nearly what we would at a purely commercial relationship. I think when I say it's about your mission, it's really about the more people, I think, for us that believe in what we're doing and appreciate what we're doing, the more opportunities that we're going to have to get offered things or free stuff, or when we need something, if our campers know about it and we let them know, then a lot of times we get people back and said, oh, I know somebody who's selling that really cheap, or I know somebody who's trying to get rid of that, or, just, oh, maybe you could do it this way instead. And that really, I think is the critical piece for us. So I think that the better community that we're able to generate, the more we find that we sort of succeed all around in really to kind of keep our expenses under control.
That's a great point. And I'd be remiss if I didn't plug the breakout that I'm doing after this on creating a 501c3. There are a lot of great tools that are out there for cutting costs. We have a 501c3 for our camp, and because of it, we don't pay sales tax. So if we go to Home Depot, and of course we buy something at Home Depot, we've checked Lowe's, we've checked Walmart, we've checked online, rule 3, but we don't pay any sales tax. And everything is 8.25% cheaper in Texas. There's all kinds of programs out there. You had mentioned a reuse warehouse. We have one here in Houston as well, where if you're a 501c3, all your building materials that you take from there are free. And it's unlimited. Take as much as you want. Anytime a construction company finishes an apartment, they have stuff left over, they donate it to this. It's basically a yard that you go and you walk out and you have your little membership card because you have a 501c3, and they let you take whatever you want. To summarize things kind of on the expense side, what I'm hearing you guys say and what we certainly adopt in our camp is a DIY ethos. Do it yourself when you can do it. Don't buy it. It's Burning Man. It's going to get destroyed anyway. It's going to get all dusty and crappy anyway. So don't buy anything nice. Just buy cheap stuff. Assume that it's going to break. Build it yourself if you can. Stuff that's made out of Pliatech and plywood looks fantastic if covered in dust. So that's the first thing. Also, don't buy anything if you can get it donated. Sometimes if not one of these programs we're talking about, your camp mates have it. Someone's got some stuff in their backyard they could give you. But it's so much easier to keep your camp sort of profitable if you're just not spending money. And a lot of stuff goes a long way when, as I think you're talking about, Ray, when you design things, design for what you have. Be flexible, adjust. Treat every penny as precious, and you can make things go a long way. Look to do things with labor, even if it's more inefficient. What's the one thing we all have a lot of in these camps? We have a ton of labor. Sometimes it's not skilled labor, but it's well-meaning labor. And, if you can take 4 guys and you guys sit around and figure it out, 4 guys and gals and figure it out, instead of hiring some professional that's going to do it perfectly in 30 minutes, it's community building anyway. Everyone will feel good about it once you actually figured it out. We had an art card that's based on a golf cart, and we screwed up the wiring and we couldn't figure it out. And we're like, well, I guess we need to take it to the mechanic. And someone said, hell no, I'm going to bring a 6-pack of beer and we're going to sit there all Saturday if we have to, and we're going to figure this out. And we did. And it took all Saturday, but it was fun and we didn't spend any money. And that was awesome. Another thing on the expense side to do that we haven't talked about yet is take care of your stuff. Really take some time at the end of Burning Man to dust everything off. If you have a generator, do some maintenance on it. If you have tools, blow the dust out of them. Try and lengthen the replacement cycle on the gear that you do have. If you are going to spend money, you want to not have to spend that money again until you absolutely have to. One other thing that I want to talk about on expenses is capitalizing expenses. And this is a situation where you want to buy something pretty expensive and you want to take a few years to pay it off. And some people are reticent to do that. They think, well, gosh, my membership turns over. I'm not really sure, how to do that. But I want to kind of throw it open to the panel. Has anyone capitalized an expense that you've paid off over a few years that you wouldn't mind talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I could go first here.
Please, Ray.
We definitely do. I'd say that we generally have used a mix of both of a few different approaches. Some years we just oftentimes take things that need to get replaced, and there's just some percentage of things that just need to get replaced every year, and it just sort of like gets covered by our different revenue sources, including camp dues. And I think that's generally acceptable. For things that we can predict, or things that sort of go toward like optionality that we might have, especially, for example, camp growth. We had one program that we had run for shade structure. So when we were trying to sort of grow the number of pods, so we organize our campers into pods, and each pod sort of had their own sort of shade structure. We had an amount of our shade structure material that needed to be increased. And then what we had done is assessed a pod dues that was effectively unequally shared to like existing people who had already paid the pod dues versus new campers who had to pay into it. So that was a way of sort of taking folks that had sort of like already paid for that capital investment and saying, thank you for paying for that. Now the new members can pay into that as well. And that was one approach that we had historically taken. Other things are just in the way that we look at things. We do look at trying to when we make a large purchase from the Bank of Custom Colt, we generally do like divide that over some number of years and try to make it so that way the full burden of that large capital expense does not hit the camp due calculation for just that 1 year that just happened to have had that cost hit. That's going to happen this year for us, for example, with our center shade. So that's generally how we look at it. Great.
Well, and sorry, Jurrient, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would just, we're having a similar situation this year, just because we have a lot of kitchen equipment, and our stoves and our ovens, they're pretty old, and they've been sitting in a container for the last 2.5 years, right? And it will be 3 years. And obviously, we're cleaning it and all that stuff, but we're like, it's time to get new equipment, because even the stuff we have, not only is it old, but we bought it used way back then. And again, if our stove gives out, we're screwed. Like, we can't gift our gift if that happens. Right. So this year we are spending a fair amount of money upgrading our kitchen equipment, and we're not really capitalizing it. We're putting that in the dues, but to Ray's point, we understand that means that it gets top heavy, that the campers who come this year are essentially going to be paying for that. But we have a lot of repeat campers. About a third of our campers are new, but the rest are veterans. But I think what could happen is, if we end up having unforeseen expenses, or people end up not coming because they can't get a ticket, or what have you, and we don't end up in the black for the year, then we would kind of de facto capitalize it, and one of us TCOs will essentially float the cost, and then we'll collect on it next year. It's not it's not an official accounting thing, but I mean, we would out of necessity do it that way.
Right, makes sense. And we can lean on accounting principles a little bit here, in that it's really people always ask, at least in our camp, well, how long do we capitalize this for? I mean, we're going to divide up the expenses over several years. How long should we do it? And we always sort of default to, how long do we think this thing's going to last? And when is it sort of not really useful anymore? Sort of like where Jurrient is, where you got to replace the stove. We're going to buy a big grill because we're serving breakfast tacos, and we think that's going to last 3 burns, and it's a big expense for us. Then we'll divide it over 3 years. And that way, everyone can see that piece of equipment getting used. If they benefit from it in that year, then they're going to pay a little bit of it through their dues. But that's another way to think about it. And then you always have what Jurrient's talking about as well, is, if you miss, it's okay to miss. And that's a great segue to our next topic here in just a second. It's okay to miss. You can capitalize that too. If you have a miss, someone doesn't have to come out of pocket, or they come out of pocket temporarily as a loan, then the rest of the camp sort of fills that in over time.
And capitalizations, the transparency obviously is paramount, right?
Huge.
I mean, we're not a 501(c), but we're probably going to become one. But we have full transparency, so anyone can see the numbers at any time. So there's no smoke and mirrors or anything like that. I think that as a TCO, that's very important as well.
Well, and all these sort of concepts synthesized together, right? So it's really easy to be transparent if you're keeping really good records, right? And it's really easy to have conversations with people about, oh, we're going to miss, or we need to buy something big. If you have sort of a year-round effort and everyone knows each other, and they're not all strangers coming together for a one-year thing, but you're building up a community. So the more you can kind of get as many of these things working for you at the same time, the easier it is to manage. So that's expenses. I'm just taking another quick look to see on our list if there's anything that we didn't cover that we wanted to cover. No, I think we got it. So now we're on to unforeseen expenses and contingencies. How do you handle those? So we've tried to be aggressive about collecting money for our camp. We've bent over backwards trying to save money and to carefully budget based on what we spent in the past. We still screwed it up. What do we do now? Let's start with you, Pablo. You're the most obvious candidate of what happens. You come out of pocket, correct?
Pretty much. If we have needed some extra shade, and and I just luckily was able to find at the auction a bunch of those backyard shade, like giant rectangles, and I was able to buy like 10 of them, for really cheap. And something like that, that was the only option I had, and then brought 2x4s to hold them up, so right. So far that's it's just been as much as I can keep away from my wife, right?
But if you have a Pablo in your camp, buy him a beer, take good care of him, and have a conversation with him about, well, what do you need to feel good about this? We appreciate you taking care of us. What do you need to see? And that circles back to what we were talking about earlier about people not abusing being in the camp, and maybe providing sweat equity where you're providing a little bit of money. So keep that in mind. Ray, let's go to you. Let's talk about a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
And thinking about having some money on hand in case things go sideways. Tell us a little bit about how you guys think about it.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Bank of Cosmic before. It's just basically like what we keep in our checking account. There is certainly that, although we most definitely try to make as much as possible that be the absolute backstop. What we're also doing in our budgeting process is leaving, certainly doing exactly what Jurrient mentioned, which is like doing that forensic analysis of previous years. Where did things come up that we didn't expect? We always do like a budget versus actual comparison to try to sort of anticipate like where and what are the typical overruns that we see. And what we do even beyond that is additionally keep buffer. And we call it buffer, but quite frankly, we almost always eat it all up. So like, we're dealing with completely unpredictable environments here. So we are most definitely trying to not budget ourselves out to the very like dollar of what we think it's going to be. We usually leave like a good, at least 10% headroom 10%. On everything that we're doing. And hope that then it doesn't even go further. And when it goes further, then we dip into the bank account and figure out some way of making that up in a fundraiser at a later time. Or something like that.
Thank you. And then Jurrient, you guys are facing this year, in particular with some of your expenses. How are you guys thinking about this uncertainty where you're not sure what these numbers are going to be?
Yeah, so for us, it comes mostly down to the variable costs, which are basically fuel, water, especially water, fuel, and pump outs, right? So we know, we rent a generator. You have to pay for all of that up front, as we all know, of course. Whether it's the shower, the water, the potable water tank, the holding tanks. So all of that we know, or we're going to know in the next month or so, and it will be paid for. And so that stuff is done. And whether we undercharge dues or overcharge dues, that's a topic for the following year, but it's a moot point for this year. But if we end up needing more water fills, and we're running down the playa looking for that United Site Services truck, right, trying to get more potable water, or our shower is backing up and we need to get it pumped, or if no one can use the toilets. So that's kind of where it can go off the rails a little bit, because again, if we're feeding more people than we budgeted for, right? Like we do late night, like for Build Week, it's easy because we make a certain amount of food, we bring it to the artists, and when we run out of food, we run out of food, and then that's the end of the evening. But for late night, there could be 100 people showing up, or there could be 1,000 people showing up. And then if we kind of go through our supplies, and that means going through our water and our propane faster than we thought, then we need to go to a health station and get more of it, or we need to get more water or more pump outs. And then we don't really know what that's going to cost until after, because you're on the playa, you're cut off from everything, and so that has happened. It probably will happen again. We try to build into the dues, like Ray said, to have that contingency. But if we do run over, then and we don't want to individually write a check to cover that, then I think we would just go back to our campers and say, who can donate an extra $100 or $50 or whatever it is that you can donate, and chances are that we'll be able to cover at least part of it, if not all of it. And we're all in this together, as a cliche as that sounds, and that's what we would have to do if we end up in the red.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, I'll tell you, in our camp in Hoopla, I mentioned earlier when we talked about revenue that we have a deposit part that's linked to behavior and trying to get people to do certain things. Well, we also make it clear to folks that if we have a miss, then we're going to pull it off those deposits. And when you deposit, it's provided the camp broke even. So you're only sort of limited by your willingness to talk with people and communicate up front what you're all trying to do together. Just like we say, don't be bashful about charging dues. Don't be bashful about running a surplus, and running a big surplus. If it happens, you can always just give that money back. You can always say to everybody, hey, look, we crushed it this year on the numbers. We built all our stuff. We got an extra $5,000. We're going to divide it up amongst everyone in the camp, and we're going to give it back. You can totally do that. That's totally allowed. No one's going to get mad at you. There's no Burning Man police. They're going to come and yell at you for not losing money or not exactly breaking even. The way I have sort of repeatedly been told things work, especially as they interact with the Bureau of Land Management, is you want to keep things break even, but people are understanding that there's some friction there. Sometimes you can't perfectly budget. And so there's nothing wrong with running a surplus and giving it back. So that at a high level, that's all the material we wanted to cover with you guys. We hit revenues, we hit expenses, and we hit unforeseen circumstances. We threw a lot at you. If for whatever reason this stuff is confusing, or you want to have a more in-depth conversation, we have a whole program within Camp Support called the Camp Advisory and Mentorship Program, where we will match you with someone who'll go through all of this as much as you want in detail. They'll sit down with your finances and sit down with your receipts. They'll spend as much time as you need. We don't want anybody losing money in Burning Man. We don't want anyone getting in trouble with their wives. We don't want anyone getting in trouble with their significant others. We want you to think of this as a great thing and want to help you. So if that's something that you could benefit from, it's campsupport@burningman.org. So we got 15 minutes left, 16 minutes left. And so we want to get to your questions. So I kept track of some questions. D-Rex, as you kind of queue up the next ones, and I'm going to try and answer a couple of those while you look for questions to feed us. The first thing I saw, and this I think came from Rambo maybe, about, when you do a fundraiser, can you sell stuff? Can you charge for stuff? Yes, you can. There are some IP rules associated with Burning Man you want to be aware of, right? So the name Burning Man is protected IP. The Burning Man symbol, the little dude, that's protected. Now, as you do things where you might want to use those symbols, be very, very careful that it's something specific towards getting your stuff to Playa, and that you are trying to get something to Burning Man. As I understand it, it's okay to do that, to use those symbols, if it's actively part of going to Burning Man and nobody's making money off of it. So if it's a fundraiser for your camp and you have any questions, throw a question into campsupport@burningman.org. Everyone's circumstances can be a little bit different, and we're going to help you through that. We have access to the Burning Man attorneys and placement, and we'll get you an answer and keep you out of trouble. But if your heart's in the right place and you're doing the right things, you're generally going to be okay. And some of the things you can do are insane. So in Texas, where I am, if you have a 501c3 that's existed for 2 years, you can do gambling. I can do a raffle where we can sell stuff and draw tickets out of a hat, and we can collect, all kinds of stuff and do fundraisers. So, you're not on Playa yet. It's certainly trying to live a decommodified lifestyle, but you got to raise money for your camp. And if it's legal in your state and that's something that you can do, be creative, explore, don't lose money.
Well, I would say, Sandor, that it is much more fun having Frick Frack at your party. And Burner Blackjack is the best.
Burner Blackjack is amazing. And how fun would it be to do a raffle for something really dumb, right? Something that nobody wants. And you convince people to each pay $5 for some dumb gift. That's the sort of stuff I love. And that I would, buy as many tickets as I could for, a painted mannequin. That'd be right up my alley. So that was kind of the one question that I saw. D-Rex.
I have another question.
Yeah, fire.
So Bubble Launch says there's a lot of great info here, and with the other breakouts too. Will the sessions be posted for viewing after today?
Yes, I can answer that one. All of the videos from today, the plenary, and these are being recorded. We're being recorded right now, and these things will be edited down, so you don't see the 30 minutes that we sat around in a room and stared at each other before we started this. And then those will be sent out for you guys to enjoy. Next question.
This is more like a comment, but I would like for you guys to hear your opinion about it. It says, I'm curious about the tension between buying cheap stuff that will likely break or not be reused versus buying quality that you can reuse and not waste.
Great question. Pablo, what do you think?
I think there's a happy medium, but if you buy a cheaper shade structure, the cheaper metal and stuff, you have to expect it's not going to last as long. So you've got to keep that in mind when you do it, and maybe, and when you really think about it, it might be stronger and cheaper to buy 2x4s than to buy a metal frame, or something. Just look at the options that are available. But yeah, it's a complicated thing, between that. I think the problem with buying really good quality stuff is it still is going to get torn up in the desert. So you have to realize that there's going to be some life just because of where we're using it.
Yeah, it's a great point. So many people overestimate how long stuff is going to last out in the playa.
I would just add to that,
yeah,
that it depends on the price point too, right?
Yes.
Sometimes a theme camp might disband or dissolve, and you can buy a whole trailer full of gear, and maybe half of it is no good, but the other half is so cheap that it makes a lot of sense. So especially for like kitchen equipment, pots and pans and things like that. I mean, a pot is a pot, right? I mean, even if it has a few dents in it. And so a lot of it just comes down to the value of buying something with a shorter shelf life, but is pennies on the dollar versus full price.
Excellent point.
I would just add one other
thing.
Yeah, just one other thing specific to like the camps that might be doing art. This is a tension we have a lot of, especially when it comes to frontage, which is a particularly like large line item for us being an Esplanade camp. One of the principles that we like to go by is we like to try to sort of like build things that can then think about how they can be adapted in future years. So in other words, let the foundation of it be really solid and reusable, but then what you attach to it be like something that could only last for like that theme that's interesting. So that's generally, so for example, we may invest this year in scaffolding, which obviously, is not bulletproof, but it's pretty good, right? For lasting a long time, and then wrap that or cover that in something, as opposed to maybe building something out of wood that we only know is going to last a couple of years. So I think like build processes factor substantially into that question of longevity.
Great, thank you. That's fantastic. D-Rex, what do you have next?
Yeah, Mary is asking a question about budget. She says, do you base your budget of campers that have tickets or of the people that you expect to camp? She says the tickets are very scarce to come in 2020 than previous years. So this person is very hesitant into how to go about this issue. Like 22 people from the camp have tickets and 16 do not have tickets.
Let me take this one, and then I'll throw this open to the panel, because we had a long discussion about this in our camp. We're normally a 50-person camp, and we have 30 DGS tickets this year, or steward sale tickets this year. And so what we decided, and it was a tough decision, that we were going to shrink the size of the camp to 30 people and make sure that the camp works for 30 people and that we can do all the things that we want to do, and then be flexible to add another 20 people if we can get the tickets. And so that's what I would strongly encourage people to think about, especially next year and the year after, when tickets, Burning Man just keeps getting more and more and more popular. And it's so hard to get these tickets that you are in some ways forced to just sort of take a look at what you're guaranteed ticket wise, and to think about, okay, well, this is what I need. I'm going to build my camp for this, but if I can get more, great. Keep in mind that next year and in the years after, it's a very different placement process. And the way the steward sale tickets are going to get allocated are different. They're going to come into you and not base your steward sale tickets on what you did the prior year, but they're going to look very closely at what you're doing in the current year. And so that may provide a little bit of relief in that you can say, look, I've got to have X number of tickets. I got this in DGS, and we, really struck to get to where we needed to be, and we made it work. But please, please, please give us this level of tickets. That's another route. It's just having a really strong, developed conversation with placement. Panel, anybody else have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can go into something. I mean, I think the answer is you got to plan for both. Yeah. The way that we generally do this is we look at it as that we look at our budgets as like starting with giving our team something conservative. There are certain things that like you just must have. And those must-haves are just like minimum viable camp expenses. But then other things, especially, for example, frontage is a phenomenal example. Costume acquisition is another example, where we're going to look at it and say that as we become more certain, as some of these uncertainties start to shake out, the number of campers is one of them, the vendor costs is another, gas prices is another. As those things start to become more clear, then we let the teams know that we're going to release additional funds to them. So what that causes our individual sort of groups within our camp to do, and again, we're big enough that we have to break into teams, but like you could just think about this just as a function. You can say that like maybe you want to do X, Y, Z for your frontage, and you prioritize, okay, well, X is the most important, and then Y is the next, and Z is the next. And you say, okay, well, we're going to approve, say, like, let's start with X. And then if we know that we get the additional campers we need, then we're going to give Y. And if those vendor costs come in at what they were last year, instead of the 25% more that I'm planning for this year, which maybe is just, as Jurrient mentioned, maybe too conservative still, then I'm going to release Z. And we generally do that with everything that we consider to be non-essential spending.
Great. Well, we're going to keep moving just because we have a few more questions to get to. We only have 6 minutes left. D-Rex, you got another one for us?
Yes. Jay asked, can you give guidance on how long certain materials last, like canvas tent, shade structures, etc.?
Anybody want to take a crack at that?
I think Pablo is the best on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I make tents for a living, so I have some input on that. But I would say on Playa, a quality 2-inch aluminum pole tent, with a 15-ounce vinyl top, a good quality one should probably last 3 to 4 years on Playa. I think that's about all you can expect. Mine's gone 4 years, and I'm using it again this year, so I'm expecting to have to replace it next. So that's a good idea. I would say 3 to 4 years is what you should expect for, and hope it lasts longer.
I don't think we're going to get better than that. D-Rex, what's the next question?
Matt is asking, is there a central shipping / gear ride share board so camps can share transportation resources?
Sure. So I saw that in the chat. Someone mentioned Spark. We're not good at this as a community. There are a lot of vendors out there that give Burning Man discounts. Nobody keeps track of them. We don't have a preferred vendor list. There are boards where we're trying to build it, right? Spark is a great example, but not a lot of people are using Spark. I've had the most success on Facebook, kind of going into groups. There's some groups around different areas like generators and gray water and mutant vehicles and all that sort of stuff. But it's a real hole. And if anyone's feeling frisky out there and wants to put together a Google list that we can all kind of pile into, that would be amazing. We may tackle it in the Burner Network 501c3 after we get through the symposium. But we got to do something as a community because there's a couple of places that we always buy our shade stuff from that give a Burning Man discount because I asked for one. And I don't know if other people are getting it. And so hopefully we can do better as a community. Anybody else want to take this?
I would say, we support quite a few people in Burning Man with banners and flags and printing, fabric printing and that kind of stuff. So, and we always offer a pretty significant discount to burners. So, we're doing that in our company separate from our camp. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would do that are in the community.
Awesome. D-Rex, I'm not seeing any more questions. Do you have any more questions?
I don't have more questions, but I have a comment from Tatiana. She said, just about to capitalize our first expense, BRC storage. We're a small camp, 16 to 25 people, and the way to amortize this is a hot debate. Do you guys have any advice for Tatiana?
Yeah, anyone have any thoughts on that? So storage, what's the right way to amortize storage?
I mean, I can try to take it.
Yeah.
Our storage is kind of complicated because we break down our storage. We have to do a lot of local storage because we're doing a lot of local events, and then we go to a bunch of regionals, and it needs to be close by. So we can't just use Gerlach storage. I would say that generally speaking, we look at when the expense is incurred and sort of attribute it to the particular thing that's going on at the time. So for example, if if all you're doing is Black Rock City, then your storage cost for the year is directly attributable to your burn. Right. I mean, that there's nothing else that storage was used for. So you can't divide it up any other way. If you are doing other things or using that for other things, then you have to come up with some sort of equation that would be able to divide that out. So for us, everything that we're storing, most of the storage, certainly everything in Gerlach is just Black Rock City related. Anything that might be used for parties or events can be divided over those events and sort of like count against the revenue on those things. But that's really just more of accounting. At the end of the day, It's probably all still coming from the same place.
Yeah, that's a conversation you got to have with your people. And it sounds like you're doing that. And maybe it's a little tension filled. But I think you're getting really good advice. I mean, if there's a big outlay up front, like you have to buy a shipping container or something similar, that's a great candidate to amortize. If you have annual expenses, like, it's going to cost this each year for storage, as Ray's saying, you tie that to your cycle and the dues for that year. It makes a ton of sense. Hey, Pablo, I think we're going to throw you some business here. A lot of people want to know what company you have. If you can toss a link or something into the chat, I think people want to pick your brain a little bit, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll type it in the chat, but our company is Above and Beyond in Irvine, California.
Awesome.
And we can ship it out, and I'll put the information in there for any way we can help.
Awesome. And look, we are out of time. I want to say thank you so much to Jurrient, to Pablo, to Ray, to D-Rex for making this happen. A ton of great information. I'm just so thrilled with what we got through. Big snaps, big applause for all of you guys. Thank you for coming. I want to plug a 501c3 panel right after this. If you want to learn about some of these things that we talked about and what a 501c3 might do for you, stick around. There'll actually be a different Zoom link. Just run to the schedule. And we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you so much, everybody.
I will say, please don't forget to give us some feedback. I posted the link to the feedback form. It's in the chat.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.